It was a bright, sunny afternoon in a tiny little town. This place was so quiet, you'd think nothing exciting ever happened. The streets were sleepy, the houses were small, and the birds chirped like they had all day to sing. In the middle of this calm town, there was a girl named Mia Carter. She was 12 years old, with messy brown hair that stuck out in every direction. Her knees had little scrapes from running around, and her big smile lit up her face like sunshine. Mia was outside in her yard, playing with her dog, Rusty. Now, Rusty wasn't just any dog. He was a scruffy little guy with floppy ears and a coat of fur that looked like it hadn't been brushed in forever. His tail wagged so fast it was like a blurry fan. Mia loved him more than anything. He followed her everywhere like her shadow, her best buddy, her everything. She'd toss him a chewed-up tennis ball, all slobbery and worn out, and he'd leap into the air to catch it. Every time he did, Mia would giggle, her laugh bouncing off the trees. They were having the best day ever, just the two of them, out in the warm sun. Mia looked like any other kid you'd see. She wore a faded blue t-shirt and sneakers with laces that were always coming untied. If you walked by, you'd think, oh, there's a regular girl playing with her dog. But here's the thing nobody in that sleepy town knew, Mia wasn't just a regular kid. Not even close. There was something special about her, something big, something secret. But nobody had a clue, not yet. Then there was her dad, Tom Carter. He lived with Mia in a little house with a creaky porch and a messy garage. Tom was the kind of guy who didn't talk much. He was quiet, like a mouse sneaking around. He wore old flannel shirts, the kind with buttons and soft colors, and he had a scruffy beard that made him look tired. Every day, he'd go to his garage and fix cars. People in town would bring him their rusty old trucks or vans that wouldn't start, and Tom would tinker with them until they purred like new. Everyone thought, oh, that's just Tom, the car guy. Nothing special. They'd wave at him, and he'd nod back, not saying a word. Ordinary, right? Nope. Totally wrong. Dead wrong. Tom had a secret, too, a giant one. But we're not spilling that just yet. You'll see soon enough. For now, let's go back to Mia and Rusty in the yard. The sun was high in the sky, painting everything golden. Mia tossed the ball again, and Rusty bolted after it, his little legs kicking up dirt. She clapped her hands and cheered, "Go, Rusty, go." He grabbed the ball in his mouth and ran back, dropping it at her feet with a proud wag of his tail. Mia bent down to pet him, scratching behind his ears the way he liked. "You're the best dog ever," she told him, and he barked like he agreed. It was perfect. The kind of day where nothing could go wrong. The kind of day you wish could last forever. But then, something changed. A noise cut through the air, loud and sharp. Sirens. You know that sound, right? Like a wailing scream from far away, getting closer and closer. Mia stopped tossing the ball. Rusty's ears perked up, and he tilted his head, confused. Mia stood there, holding the tennis ball, her smile fading just a little. She looked down the street, squinting into the sun. The sirens were getting louder now, so loud they drowned out the birds and the breeze. Something was coming. Something big. The neighbors didn't notice much at first. Old Mrs. Jenkins was watering her flowers across the street, humming a tune. Mr. Lopez was mowing his lawn, the buzz of the mower mixing with the sirens. They didn't think anything of it. Sirens happen sometimes, even in a quiet town. Maybe a cat got stuck in a tree, or someone's car broke down. But Mia felt it in her tummy, a twisty, funny feeling. She hugged Rusty close, his fur tickling her chin. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, even though she wasn't so sure. Picture this, Mia standing there, a skinny kid with wild hair, clutching her dog. The yard was small, with patchy grass and a wooden fence that leaned a little to the left. The sun was still shining, but those sirens were screaming now, so close you could feel them in your chest. Down the road, a dusty patrol car turned the corner. Its red and blue lights flashed, bouncing off the houses. 2 cops were inside, their faces hard and grumpy. They didn't look friendly. Not one bit. "Hey, quick question for you, have you ever had a day that started perfect, then turned upside down? Maybe you were playing outside, or eating your favorite snack, and then bam, something ruined it. Stick around, because Mia's about to have one of those days. You won't believe what happens next. That patrol car slowed down, tires crunching on the gravel near Mia's house. The sirens shut off, but the quiet felt heavy, like the air was holding its breath. Mia watched as the car stopped right by her yard. Rusty growled low in his throat, his tail still for the first time all day. Mia's heart started beating faster. She didn't know why, but she knew something bad was coming. Something that would change everything. The town thought they knew Mia and Tom. A regular kid and her boring dad. That's what everyone saw. But looks can trick you. Underneath Mia's big smile and Tom's quiet nods, there was more, way more. This sleepy little town was about to wake up, and it all started right here, in this sunny yard, with a girl and her dog. The cops stepped out of the car, boots thumping on the ground. They were tall, with shiny badges and loud voices. They looked at Mia like she was just a little bug they could squish. Oh, they had no idea who they were messing with. Mia tightened her grip on Rusty's collar. "Stay, boy," she said softly. The cops walked closer, their shadows stretching across the grass. One of them, a big guy with a mean frown, pointed at Rusty. "That your dog, kid?" he barked. Mia nodded, her throat dry. She didn't like how he said it, like Rusty was trouble. Rusty wasn't trouble. He was her friend. But these cops? They didn't care about that. They were about to do something awful, and Mia couldn't stop them. Not yet. The sun kept shining, the day kept going, but everything felt different now. Mia's perfect afternoon was slipping away, and those cops were the reason. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Mia wasn't alone. She had her dad. And Tom Carter? He wasn't just a guy who fixed cars. He was something else, something dangerous, something nobody in this town was ready for. But that's a secret for later. Right now, it's just Mia, Rusty, and two cops who are about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. The sunny afternoon didn't feel sunny anymore. A dusty patrol car rolled up to Mia's yard, its tires making a crunchy sound on the gravel. Inside were two cops, Officer Daniels and Officer Hayes. They were big guys, tall and wide, with loud voices that boomed like thunder. They acted like they owned the whole town, strutting around with attitudes bigger than their badges. Someone had called them, saying there was a dangerous dog running loose. A dangerous dog? That was crazy. Mia's dog, Rusty, wasn't dangerous at all. He was a scruffy little pup who loved to wag his tail and lick people's faces. He'd never hurt anyone, not even a fly. But these cops didn't care about that. They didn't even ask questions. Mia stood there, holding Rusty's collar tight. She was just a kid 12 years old, with messy hair and a faded blue t-shirt. To the cops, she didn't look like much. Just a little girl in a patchy yard with a silly dog. Officer Daniels stepped out of the car first. He was the bigger one, with a mean face and a hand resting on his belt like he was some kind of cowboy in an old movie. "Get him inside, now," he yelled, pointing at Rusty. His voice was so loud it made Mia jump. She froze, her sneakers stuck to the ground. Rusty whimpered a little, pressing close to her leg. "He's not hurting anyone," Mia said. Her voice was small, like a whisper, but it didn't shake. She meant it. Rusty wasn't bad, he was her best friend. She looked up at the cops, her big eyes wide and scared, but she didn't back down. Officer Hayes, the other cop, laughed a mean laugh. He had a sneer on his face, like he thought Mia was dumb. "Kid, we don't got time for this," he said, crossing his arms. He acted like Mia was wasting their day, like she was nothing. Mia's tummy twisted. She didn't know what to do. She wanted to run inside with Rusty and hide, but her feet wouldn't move. She just held onto him tighter, her fingers digging into his scruffy fur. Then, before she could say another word, Daniels did something awful. He pulled out his gun. It happened so fast Mia didn't even have time to blink. The gun was shiny and black, and it looked heavy in his hand. Rusty barked once, a little yip, like he was confused. Then bang. One loud noise, so loud it hurt Mia's ears. Rusty fell to the ground, still and quiet. Mia's scream ripped through the air. It was high and sharp, like a siren all its own. She dropped to her knees next to Rusty, her hands shaking as she touched his fur. "No, no, no," she cried. Her best buddy wasn't moving. His tail wasn't wagging. His big, happy eyes were closed. Tears poured down Mia's face, big wet drops that splashed onto the dirt. She hugged Rusty tight, like maybe she could wake him up. But he didn't move. He was gone. The cops didn't even look sorry. Officer Hayes kicked some dirt over the blood on the ground, like it was no big deal. Should have listened, he muttered, his voice cold and hard. Daniels put his gun back in its holder, shrugging like he'd just swatted a bug. They turned around, climbed into their dusty car, and drove off. The engine roared, and the tires crunched away, leaving Mia alone with Rusty. The sirens didn't come back on. They didn't need to. The cops were done, and they didn't care what they'd left behind. Mia sat there, sobbing. Her cries were loud at first, then quieter, like she was running out of air. She pressed her face into Rusty's fur, her tears making it wet. The yard felt empty now. The tennis ball sat in the grass, forgotten. The sun was still shining, but it didn't feel warm anymore. It felt wrong, like the world didn't know what had just happened. Mia's heart hurt so bad she could feel it in her chest, like someone was squeezing it tight. Neighbors started peeking out their windows. Old Mrs. Jenkins stopped watering her flowers and stared, her mouth open a little. Mr. Lopez turned off his lawnmower and leaned over his fence, frowning. They could hear Mia crying, see her sitting there with Rusty, and they whispered to each other. "Poor kid," they said. "What a shame." They shook their heads and sighed, like it was just a sad little story. To them, Mia was just a helpless girl, a kid who lost her dog. They felt bad, sure, but they didn't do anything. They just watched. Oh, how wrong they were. Mia wasn't helpless. She was sad, she was mad, she was broken but helpless. No way. And those cops? They thought they'd won. They thought they could roll in, bark orders, and do whatever they wanted. They saw a little girl and a scruffy dog and figured that was it, end of story. But this wasn't the end. This was just the start. Mia's sobs got quieter, but her hands balled into fists. She looked at Rusty, so still on the ground, and something hot burned inside her. She didn't know what to do yet, but she knew this wasn't okay. Those cops couldn't just take Rusty away and leave like nothing happened. They didn't know it, but they'd poked a bear, a big, quiet bear who was about to wake up. The neighbors kept whispering. "She's all alone now," they said. "Poor little thing." But Mia wasn't alone. She had her dad, Tom Carter. And Tom? He wasn't just the quiet guy who fixed cars. He was something else, something scary, something those cops didn't see coming. The town didn't know it yet, but trouble was brewing. Big trouble. Mia wiped her eyes with her sleeve, leaving a smear of dirt on her cheek. She stood up, her legs wobbly but strong enough. She looked down the street where the patrol car had disappeared. Her voice was tiny, but it carried a promise. "They can't do this," she said to herself. "They can't." She didn't know how, but she'd make it right. Or someone would. The air felt heavy now, like a storm was rolling in even though the sky was clear. The cops thought they'd gotten away with it. They were probably laughing, patting each other on the back, thinking they were tough. But they didn't know Mia. They didn't know Tom. They didn't know what was waiting for them. Rusty's little body lay in the yard, and Mia's tears kept falling. The neighbors went back to their flowers and their lawns, thinking it was over. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Something big was coming, something those cops would wish they'd never started. Mia wasn't just a kid, and this wasn't just a sad day. It was the beginning of a fight, and the tension was building, slow and quiet, like a volcano ready to blow. Stick around, because you won't believe what happens next. Mia's sneakers pounded the ground as she ran home, her tears making wet lines down her dirty cheeks. She didn't stop, didn't look back, just ran as fast as her legs could carry her. Her messy hair flew everywhere, and her chest hurt from crying so hard. Rusty was gone, and those mean cops had done it. She burst through the front door of her little house, the screen banging loud behind her. "Dad," she yelled, her voice all shaky and loud. Tom Carter was in the garage, like always. He was bent over his workbench, fixing some car part with his big, rough hands. Tools clinked and clanked as he worked, screwdrivers, wrenches, little metal bits all scattered around. When he heard Mia's cry, he stopped cold. He looked up, his scruffy beard and quiet eyes catching the light. Then he saw her face red, wet with tears, and full of hurt. The tool in his hand dropped with a loud thud onto the workbench. He didn't wait a second. "What happened, kiddo?" he asked, his voice soft but strong. He knelt down on one knee so he could look right at her, his flannel shirt crinkling as he moved. Mia tried to talk, but the words got stuck between big, messy sobs. She hiccuped and wiped her nose with her sleeve. "Rusty," she started, her voice breaking. "The cops, they shot him." She told him everything, how the cops rolled up in their dusty car, how they yelled at her, how Daniels pulled out his gun and bang, Rusty was gone. She cried harder, her little fists clenched tight. Tom listened, his face getting harder with every word. His jaw tightened, like he was biting down on something tough. His eyes, usually so calm, turned dark like a big storm cloud rolling over the sky. He didn't say much, just pulled Mia into a big, warm hug. His arms wrapped around her tight, and he whispered, "I'll fix this." His voice was quiet, but it wasn't weak. It was a promise. Mia cried into his shirt for a while, her tears soaking the soft flannel. She felt so small, so sad, but her dad's hug made her feel a little safer. Tom didn't let go until her sobs turned into sniffles. Then he stood up, slow and steady, and patted her head. "Go wash your face, kiddo," he said. "I've got this." Mia nodded, still shaky, and shuffled off to the bathroom. She didn't know what he meant by fix this, but she trusted him. Her dad always made things better, like when her bike broke or when she scraped her knee. He'd figure it out. That night, the house was quiet. Mia curled up on the couch with a blanket, her eyes red and puffy. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Rusty falling, heard that loud bang. She hugged her knees and stared at the TV, even though it wasn't on. Meanwhile, Tom wasn't sleeping either. He was out in the garage, sitting on an old wooden stool. The lights were dim, just a little bulb swinging above his workbench. He wasn't fixing cars now. He was staring at something, an old metal box tucked under the bench. It was scratched up, covered in dust, like it hadn't been touched in forever. Tom reached down and pulled the box out, slow and careful. The hinges creaked as he opened it. Inside, there wasn't much, just a few things, but they were big secrets. First, a faded picture. It showed a younger Tom, standing tall in a black uniform. His face was serious, his hair short, and a shiny medal was pinned to his chest. Next to that was a badge, a little piece of metal with words scratched into it, Delta Force. That's right, Delta Force. The neighbors didn't know. The cops didn't know. Nobody in this sleepy town had a clue. Tom Carter wasn't just a mechanic who fixed cars. He'd been a soldier, a super tough one. The deadliest guy Uncle Sam ever trained. Silent like a shadow, smart like a fox, and unstoppable like a train. Years ago, he'd done big, dangerous things, missions nobody talked about. But then he left that life, moved to this quiet town, and started over with Mia. He wanted peace. Until now. See, someone had messed with his little girl. Those cops thought they could yell, shoot Rusty, and walk away like it was nothing. Big mistake. Tom's hands tightened around the box, his knuckles turning white. He didn't cry like Mia. He didn't yell or stomp around. He just sat there, thinking, his dark eyes burning. The storm inside him was growing, but he kept it locked up for now. Mia didn't see what happened next. She was inside, trying to forget the awful day. But out in the garage, Tom picked up an old phone, not the one he used every day, but a different one, hidden in that box. He started making calls. Quiet ones. His voice was low, so low you'd barely hear it if you were standing right there. He called old friends, guys he hadn't talked to in years. Friends from his soldier days. The kind of friends who don't ask questions, who just say yes when Tom needs something. "Hey, it's me," he'd say. "I need a favor." That was it. Short and simple. But those calls? They were like dropping pebbles in a pond, small at first, but the ripples would get bigger. Way bigger. The cops, Daniels and Hayes, had no idea. They were probably at home, eating dinner or watching TV, laughing about what they did. They thought Mia was just a crybaby kid and Tom was just some boring dad. They didn't know Tom was planning. They didn't know he was waking up that old soldier inside him, the one who never lost, who always won, no matter what. Something big was coming, something they couldn't stop. Back in the house, Mia finally fell asleep on the couch, her blanket pulled up to her chin. She didn't know about the box or the calls. She didn't know her dad was more than a car fixer. All she knew was that he'd said, "I'll fix this," and she believed him. Outside, the night was still, crickets chirping, stars twinkling. The town slept, quiet and calm. But in that garage, Tom closed the metal box and stood up. He wasn't the quiet mechanic anymore. He was something else, something dangerous. The air felt heavier now, like it knew trouble was brewing. Those cops had started something they couldn't finish. Mia's tears, Rusty's fall, the loud bang, it all piled up, pushing Tom to do what he did best. He wasn't loud about it. He didn't need to be. That's what made him scary. The neighbors kept sleeping, the cops kept laughing, but Tom? He was moving, slow and sure, like a lion waking up. Something big was on its way, and those two cops? They didn't have a clue what they'd unleashed. Stick around, this is just the beginning. 2 days had passed since Rusty got shot. The sleepy little town was back to normal, or so it seemed. At the police station, Officer Daniels and Officer Hayes were sitting in a small room with chipped paint on the walls. They had coffee cups in their hands, steam curling up into the air. The room smelled like old donuts and burnt coffee. The two cops were laughing, their loud voices bouncing off the walls. "That kid's probably still crying," Daniels said with a chuckle. He leaned back in his chair, his big belly jiggling as he laughed. Hayes grinned, showing his crooked teeth. "Yeah, what a baby," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. They thought it was funny. They thought they'd gotten away with everything. But then, something weird happened. The lights in the room flickered like someone was flipping a switch on and off real fast. Daniel stopped laughing and looked up. "What's that?" he mumbled. The radio on the table crackled, making a scratchy noise that hurt their ears. Hayes frowned and reached for it, but before he could touch it, a shadow moved outside the window. It was quick, dark, and quiet, like a ghost slipping by. The cops squinted, trying to see what it was. "Probably just a bird," Hayes said, shrugging. But he didn't sound so sure. Then boom. The door to the room flew open, like someone had kicked it with a giant boot. It wasn't just opened, it blew open, slamming against the wall so hard the whole building shook. Smoke rolled in, thick and gray, swirling around like fog on a spooky night. The cops jumped up, their chairs scraping the floor. Coffee spilled everywhere, splashing on their boots. They coughed and waved their hands, trying to see through the smoke. And then, out of the haze, a man stepped forward. It was Tom Carter, Mia's dad. But this wasn't the Tom they knew. Tom didn't look like the quiet guy in flannel shirts anymore. No old jeans, no greasy hands from fixing cars. He was wearing tactical gear, black from head to toe, like a soldier ready for battle. His pants had pockets stuffed with gear, his shirt was tight and tough, and his boots were shiny and heavy. His face was hard, his jaw set like stone. And his eyes? They burned with a fire so hot it could melt ice. This wasn't the mechanic who nodded at neighbors. This was someone else, someone scary. Daniels and Hayes stared, their mouths hanging open. "Who's this clown?" Hayes snorted, trying to sound tough. He reached for his gun, his hand shaky on the holster. But Tom didn't blink. He didn't even flinch. In 2 seconds flat, faster than you can count to 3, he moved. He grabbed Hayes by the arm, twisted it hard, and slammed him against the wall. Hayes yelped, his face smashing into the paint. His gun clattered to the floor, useless. Tom held him there, Hayes' arm bent back so far he couldn't move. "Ow, ow, let go." Hayes whined, but Tom didn't budge. Daniels fumbled with his radio, his fat fingers slipping on the buttons. "Back up. We need backup," he yelled, his voice high and scared. But Tom was too fast. With one quick kick, he sent the radio flying. It smashed against the wall, breaking into little pieces that scattered like toys. Daniels froze, his eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. Tom turned to him, stepping closer. His voice was low and cold, like a growl from a big dog. "You shot my daughter's dog," he said. "Big mistake." The air in the room felt heavy now, like it was pressing down on everyone. Daniels gulped, his coffee breath puffing out. Hayes squirmed against the wall, but he couldn't get free. They didn't know what to say. They'd laughed at Mia, thought she was just a crybaby kid. They'd ignored Tom, figured he was nobody special. But now they were starting to see they'd messed up bad. Just then, the chief of police ran in. He was a short guy with a big mustache, always yelling about rules and paperwork. "What's going on?" he shouted, his voice loud and mad. He stopped in the doorway, his boots squeaking on the floor. The smoke was clearing now, and he saw Tom standing there tall, dark, and dangerous. The chief's eyes got big, like saucers. He blinked once, twice, then froze. "Carter," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Delta Force Carter." The room went dead quiet. You could hear a pin drop. Daniel's face turned white, like all the color drained out of it. Hayes stopped struggling, his body going limp against the wall. Delta Force? What was that? They didn't know much, but they'd heard stories, whispers about super tough soldiers who did secret missions. The kind of guys who could sneak in, take out bad guys, and disappear without a sound. Was Tom one of those guys? The chief knew. He'd seen Tom's name somewhere, years ago, in some old file. And now he remembered. Tom let go of Hayes, and the cop slid down the wall, landing in a heap on the floor. Hayes rubbed his arm, whimpering like a kicked puppy. Tom stepped toward Daniels, who backed up so fast he tripped over a chair. "You hurt my kid," Tom said, his voice steady and icy. "Now you deal with me." He didn't yell. He didn't need to. Every word hit like a hammer, hard and heavy. Daniels stammered, trying to talk. We didn't know," he said, his hands up like he could stop Tom. "It was just a dog." But Tom's eyes narrowed. Just a dog. Rusty wasn't just a dog to Mia. He was her best friend, her buddy, her everything. And these cops had taken him away with one loud bang. They didn't care then, but they were starting to care now. The chief stepped forward, his mustache twitching. "Carter, let's talk about this," he said, trying to sound calm. But his voice shook a little. He knew who Tom was now. Delta Force Carter, the guy who'd done things nobody talked about. The guy who could break you without even trying. The chief waved his hands. "We can fix this," he said. But Tom didn't move. He stood there, a black shadow in the middle of the room, his fire eyes locked on Daniels and Hayes. The cops were trapped. The laughing was gone. The tough guy act was over. Daniels' coffee cup rolled across the floor, spilling the last few drops. Hayes stayed down, too scared to stand. They'd thought they were big shots, yelling at a kid, shooting her dog. But now they saw the truth. Tom wasn't just Mia's dad. He was a soldier, a real one. And he was mad. Really mad. The big reveal was here. The secret was out. The flannel shirt mechanic was gone, and Delta Force Carter was in his place. The room stayed quiet, everyone holding their breath. What would Tom do next? The cops didn't know, but they knew one thing: they'd picked the wrong kid to mess with. And now, they were in deep, deep trouble. Stick around, this isn't over yet. By the time the sun came up, the whole town was buzzing. Everyone knew what happened. Officer Daniels and Officer Hayes? They were gone, kicked out of their jobs, shamed in front of everybody, and in big trouble with the law. They weren't cops anymore. The chief of police ran around like a chicken with no head, saying sorry over and over. He couldn't apologize fast enough. He kept saying, "We didn't mean it, and we'll make it right." But it was too late. Tom Carter had already taken care of everything. See, Tom didn't just scare those cops away. He was smarter than that. Back when he was a Delta Force soldier, he learned how to be sneaky and clever. So, when he stormed into the police station, he had a little camera hidden on him. It recorded everything: the smoke, the yelling, the way he pinned Hayes to the wall, and how scared Daniels looked. Tom sent that video straight to the news people. By morning, it was everywhere, on TV, on phones, all over the internet. The headline screamed big and bold: "Cops mess with wrong girl, dad turns out to be elite soldier." People watched it over and over, their jaws dropping. It went viral, spreading like wildfire. Daniels and Hayes couldn't hide. The video showed the world what they did, how they shot Rusty, and laughed about it. Now, nobody was laughing. The town was mad. People said, those cops were mean, and they deserve it. The chief fired them right away, and the law came knocking. They might even go to jail. Justice was served, and it felt good, like when the bad guys lose in a movie. Tom made sure they paid for hurting Mia. Mia was still sad about Rusty, but something nice happened. A few days later, Tom brought home a new puppy. He was a little guy with floppy ears and a wiggly tail. Mia named him Blaze because he was fast and full of fire, just like her dad's eyes that night. She hugged Blaze tight, and a little smile came back to her face. It wasn't the same as Rusty, but it helped her heart feel a tiny bit better. The neighbors saw everything on the news. They couldn't believe Quiet Tom was a super soldier. Now, they were scared to even look at him funny. They started leaving treats on Mia's porch: cookies, candies, even dog biscuits for Blaze. They'd drop them off and hurry away, not saying much. Nobody wanted to mess with Tom Carter anymore. And Tom? He went back to fixing cars in his garage, like nothing happened. He put on his old flannel shirt, grabbed his tools, and got to work. But everyone knew the truth now. Mess with Mia, and you'd answer to him. The town wasn't sleepy anymore, it was wide awake, whispering about the mechanic who wasn't just a mechanic. Things would never be the same, and that was okay. Mia had her dad, Blaze had a home, and the bad guys got what they deserved. Justice won, and the good guys were safe. Okay, let's talk about something big, viewer. Sometimes, the people you think are weak, like they can't do much, are actually the strongest ones around. Think about Mia. She's just a kid, right? 12 years old, with messy hair and a little dog. When those mean cops hurt Rusty, she didn't punch or yell. She didn't need to. She had her dad, Tom. And Tom? He didn't need to scream or make a big fuss to win. He just did what he had to do, quiet, smart, and strong. He acted, and that was enough. Pretty cool, huh? It makes you wonder. Who's got your back when everything goes wrong? Maybe it's your mom or dad, a big brother, or a best friend. Maybe it's someone quiet who doesn't say much, but when you need them, bam, they're there, like a superhero without a cape. Mia didn't look tough, but she had Tom. And Tom didn't look scary in his flannel shirt, fixing cars all day, but he was a Delta Force soldier inside. Looks can trick you. The weakest looking person might be the strongest one in the room. This story shows us something important. You don't have to be loud or big to matter. Mia cried when Rusty got shot, but her tears didn't mean she was weak. They meant she loved him. And Tom didn't talk a lot, but his actions shouted louder than words. He stood up for Mia when she couldn't. That's real strength, helping someone you love, no matter what. Maybe you've got that strength too, even if you don't know it yet. Maybe you're the one who's got someone's back, ready to step up when they need you. So, what about you? Think about it. If the world turns upside down, if something bad happens, who's there for you? And who are you there for? It's a big question, but it's fun to think about. Life can be hard sometimes, like it was for Mia, but having someone strong in your corner makes it better. And maybe you're stronger than you think, just waiting for your moment to shine. Hey, thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end. I hope you liked the story. It's got dogs, bad guys, and a dad who's tougher than nails. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were Mia or Tom? Would you cry like Mia, or fight like Tom? Maybe both? I wanna know. And if this story got your heart racing, if it made you cheer when those cops got caught, hit that like button. Oh, and subscribe for more stories like this. I've got tons more to tell you, full of surprises and cool stuff. See you next time, okay? Keep being awesome.